If you're happy with the outcome of the 2024 U.S. presidential election, you might want to thank the transgender movement. The post-election autopsies after Donald Trump's sweep of every single swing state are still coming in, and there is a lot to discuss and debate. Obviously, there was a lot of factors playing into this election, but one conclusion is already very much approaching consensus, and that is that the Democrats' embrace of gender ideology, the transgender movement, and the radical transgender agenda hurt them, and very badly. The Democrats are actually now, and this has been very humorous to watch, engaged in a minor civil war on how to deal with the T and the LGBT. And there's a lot of accusations flying thick and fast. There's a lot of panicking going on in the LGBT movement right now, based on the fact that some Democrats are going on TV and they're openly excoriating their other colleagues and stating that they should back off of this, that this is not where Americans are, that this is something that they should avoid from now on. And of course, the response they're getting from media figures is this is something that cannot be compromised on. But if you had told me a couple of weeks ago that one of the first congresswomen to sort of appear to buckle on the issue would be Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you could have knocked me over with a feather. But she, AOC, as she's known, one of the squad members of the kind of progressive phalanx of the Democratic Party, was one of the very first to remove her pronouns from her X profile. So about 5-6 years ago, a lot of Democrats started including their pronouns in their bio. So she, her, he, him, they, them, etc., etc. And so this was just a way of signaling to the transgender movement that they were firmly on side. But it was also a way of essentially affirming the premises of the transgender movement. If you are willing to offer your pronouns, you're affirming their pronouns. And so this has been going on now for quite a while, but AOC, the head of the squad, was one of the first ones to remove them. That gives you an idea of how badly transgender issues played with the American public. Now, this has got a lot of late night TV hosts panicking. I wrote a column a while back for the European Conservative on late night hosts for female genital mutilation. We got Jon Stewart, you got Jimmy Kimmel, you had especially John Oliver, who were all in for the transgender movement. And they've now recognized that these issues didn't play well, and they're trying to backtrack. His claim that the Democrats just didn't know how to talk about this isn't true at all. The Democrats knew how to talk about this. They took the language that GLAAD asked them to use, that the Human Rights Campaign wanted them to use, and they lost. And the polls tell a very different story. So let me get into just a few of the polls that indicate how much the transgender movement helped Donald Trump secure the presidency in 2024. According to the Associated Press's VoteCast, in a survey of over 120,000 people, so this is a very, very big poll, who voted this fall, found that more than half of voters, found that, quote, support for transgender rights in government and society has gone too far, end quote. Only 2 in 10 of the 120,000 people surveyed said that support hadn't gone far enough, and only 2 in 10 said it's about right. So not only do most people not want to go further, they think that people have already gone too far. 85% of those who voted for Trump said that support for the transgender agenda has gone too far, which isn't particularly surprising, but a quarter of Kamala Harris's voters agreed with that. Now, Trump's ads hammering Kamala Harris's longstanding support for the transgender agenda were pinpointed by multiple media outlets as being particularly effective. And these ads really were quite something to watch. They were pretty amusing and pretty brutal. Let me play one of these ads for you, the most famous one of the bunch.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
So this was a brilliant ad for a bunch of reasons, but There's a bunch of Democrats now claiming that the Trump campaign fear-mongered about the Democratic agenda on the LGBT movement and the LGBT agenda, and that's not true. They had a massive celebration on the Biden White House lawn featuring not only trans activists and gay activists, but they actually showed, men with breasts flashing the camera. They had people in various states of undress. It was like there wasn't a drag queen in America that Joe Biden didn't want to photo op with and didn't want to get a photograph of him clutching. And so they're the ones who did this. He's the one who appointed that admiral. The male admiral who was wearing long hair, very clearly a dude. His name was Richard Levine, but he was known as Rachel Levine. And it was a big deal that he was the first transgender, high-ranking military officer. Then there was the weird cross-dressing national security guy. You saw him there in the ad. He was the guy with the mustache, the lipstick, wearing dresses who got into a scandal because he was stealing people's luggage so he could wear women's clothing. Trump didn't have to invent these people. Like, he didn't hire actors to show up in these ads to make the Biden administration look nuts. These were people that the Biden administration chose not only to hire, but to put front and center. So this ad that was highlighting the trans-identifying staff members, as well as the funding of surgeries for prisoners, etc., and the slogan, Kamala Harris is for they, them, and President Trump is for you, caused a big impact, but also among Democrats. There was a great report in the New York Times kind of trying to do an autopsy of the election and figure out what worked and what didn't. And apparently, Bill Clinton was so alarmed when he saw these ads that he reached out to the Biden-Harris White House and to the Harris campaign specifically, and he urged them to repudiate support for this policy. He said, you need to put out a counter ad and say that this is not something that you support. So not just that you need to explain your policy better. Bill Clinton told them, you've got to tell them you don't support this, because he was watching this ad and thinking this stuff looks nuts. But Clinton was told that the ads would have no impact at all. And the Trump campaign did a follow-up ad, which featured a liberal podcast host, quote, Charlemagne the God, is what he refers to himself as. This guy's very liberal. He's a Harris supporter. And Trump's follow-up ad showed this guy, Charlemagne, expressing his shock at Harris's transgender positions. And it's actually a really funny ad, because you see him watching the ad and saying, what? Like, I don't want to support this. I don't want my money paying for trans-identifying prisoners to get sex changes in prison. And those two ads reportedly moved voters 2.7%, according not to the Trump campaign, but to the Harris super PAC Future Forward. One report put it really bluntly, this was the Associated Press, the transgender issue capsized the Harris campaign, a new Democratic poll has found. And let me read to you directly from the report. Among swing voters, this issue, that is the transgender issue, moved swing votes away from Harris more than any other. Swing voters said they did not vote for the Democratic ticket in 2024 because Kamala Harris is focused more on cultural issues like transgender issues rather than helping the middle class. That statement ranked 1 point ahead of voter dissatisfaction with inflation and 2 points higher, this is nuts, 2 points higher than illegal immigration, according to Blueprint, a new public opinion research initiative founded by LinkedIn founder Reid Hoffman and designed to, quote, provide insights and recommendations on how to reach the voters who will be essential to delivering the Democrats the White House and control of Congress. Liberal women were much less comfortable than they were with any other issue, the New York Times stated. Moms get really visibly angry at this issue, noted Republican pollster Jim McLaughlin. It's a fairness issue. They don't want their daughters to lose a scholarship, and they don't want them to get hurt. Well, apparently, all these moms just need to listen to John Oliver telling them that this issue isn't a big deal at all, that they're crazy for stressing about it. It's a vanishingly small number of people, that there's no threat to fairness, that males have no physical and competitive advantages over females, despite the fact that we see in the college sphere a guy who couldn't even make it in men's swimming immediately shoot to the very, very top of female competitive swimming. You clearly should be listening to guys like John Oliver and Jon Stewart and Jimmy Kimmel a lot more, or Jen Psaki, who was once the once the press secretary for Joe Biden now has a show on MSNBC, she too just this week did a whole segment on the transgender agenda, explaining why Democrats shouldn't back off of this issue and why it wasn't really the loser that Democrats are now starting to suspect it was. Now, interestingly, the Harris campaign wildly underestimated how big of an impact the transgender issue would have on the campaign, because they actually did draft a few response ads, but the ads never ran. And you can see why, because if you're explaining in politics you're losing, they recognize that this election was probably predominantly about the Democrats' economic record. And the reality, though, is, and this is the beauty of the Gordian knot the Democrats find themselves in, is that they haven't left themselves much wiggle room on the issue at all. Because for years, they've literally accused political opponents of threatening the lives of trans kids and declaring that every jot and tittle of the transgender agenda is a matter of fundamental human rights. The 2024 Democratic Party platform is basically a wholesale endorsement of the trans movement, and it explicitly opposes any restrictions on sex changes for kids. So you see state houses right across the country. Roughly half of the 50 states already have some form of legislation protecting sex-based rights. You've got people like Chloe Cole and others who are permanently damaged by transgender surgeries, cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, who are essentially going on the road to tell their story in front of TV cameras and testifying in front of Congress and speaking at various state legislatures. And the Democrats made incredibly clear that the transgender agenda was at the top of their priority list, that the LGBT movement was going to get everything they asked for from both the Biden White House and the Harris White House. Kamala Harris ran on her LGBT agenda. She spoke with all of the top activist groups. She told them she had their back. And despite the fact that she's a chronically dishonest person, it was one of the few believable things she said on the campaign trail, because in addition to the abortion industry, the LGBT movement is probably the only thing Kamala Harris has ever been faithful to. And yet now she finds herself trapped in this position where they've accused anybody who wants the most moderate legislation limiting the most radical aspects of the transgender agenda as essentially people who want to murder trans-identifying children. But now they've just realized this is a real political loser. And you've got Democratic politicians on TV saying, we've got to figure out how to back away from this issue. You've got AOC removing her pronouns because, as it turns out, the second Congress's pronouns are Republican majority. AOC decides that it's time to change her pronouns in response. So to back away, as many strategists are advising, is going to mean getting hammered both by the GOP on hypocrisy and by the LGBT movement on betrayal. So they really are between a rock and a hard place, but they're going to have to do something, because even progressive atheist and staunch Harris supporter Sam Harris, who is not in fact related to Kamala Harris, he observed that the trans issue was a sinking albatross for Democrats. Again, Sam Harris is an atheist who wrote Letter to a Christian Nation. He's very pro-abortion. He's pretty okay with almost every aspect of the LGBT agenda, but he's very opposed to the censorious and anti-scientific nature of the transgender agenda. And he wrote a long essay explaining why he thinks Trump won. Now, Harris was almost hysterical about the idea of Donald Trump winning. And so it's really, really interesting to see his conclusion. I want to read a quote from his Substack newsletter here. I know people who haven't been touched by this issue personally, for whom it was the only issue that decided their vote, referring to the transgender issue. In fact, it is the issue that fully radicalized Elon Musk, and he has spoken about this at length. Do you think Elon continuously messaging to 200 million people on X and going to Trump's rallies and donating over $100 million to his campaign and supporting him on podcasts and doing everything else in his power to get Trump elected might have counted for a few votes? Harris's conclusion was really blunt. He said, honestly, I think a doctoral dissertation and perhaps several could be written on how trans activism completely destroyed Democratic politics without most Democrats knowing. To say that trans-identifying men are women, Harris went on, and that making any distinction between them and biological women for any purpose is a thought crime and an act of bigotry. This is the precept of a new religion, and it is a religion that most Americans want nothing to do with. Now, I think Harris is completely right on this, and Harris, the atheist, not the candidate, is precisely right about something else. He is right that gender ideology radicalized Elon Musk, who just happens to be the world's richest man. First of all, Musk purchased Twitter for $44 billion, in part because he viewed it as the world's town square, and he is a free speech absolutist, but in part because accounts like the Babylon Bee were getting banned for so-called misgendering and other sins against the transgender movement. And Musk's decision to permit free speech on one of the world's largest platforms undoubtedly had an additional impact on the 2024 election. So this is something else we can thank trans activists for. But the moment that truly radicalized Musk, according to Musk himself, was when his son Xavier began identifying as transgender. Xavier changed his name to Vivian at the age of 18, and then he changed his last name. He wanted to get rid of the last name Musk in order to distance himself from his famous father. Here is how Elon Musk described that experience in a conversation with Jordan Peterson.
I was essentially tricked into signing documents for one of my older boys, Xavier. This is before I had really any understanding of what was going on, and we had COVID going on, and so there was a lot of confusion. I was told, Xavier might commit suicide if he.
That was a lie right from the outset.
Incredibly evil, and I agree with you that people that have been promoting this should go to prison.
That's
so I was tricked into doing this, it wasn't explained to me that puberty blockers are actually just sterilization drugs. And so I lost my son, essentially. They call it dead naming for a reason.
Yeah,
all right. So the reason it's called dead naming is because your son is dead. So my son Xavier is dead, killed by the woke mind virus.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what that would be like.
Yeah. So.
And there's lots of people in that situation now.
Right.
It's not pretty, and lots of demolished kids.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that's a good reason to be the final straw. All right, so let's.
So I vowed to destroy the woke mind virus after that, and we're making some progress.
Join the club.
Yeah.
See how he ended that story to Jordan Peterson. He thinks to himself, kind of pauses sadly, and said, because the woke mind virus killed my son, I vowed to destroy the woke mind virus, and we're making some progress. There is a direct line from transgender ideology infecting the minds of many children who join what is essentially a cult, who end up opting for so-called treatments that perpetrate irreversible damage on their bodies and their minds. And Elon Musk deciding that enough was enough. Elon Musk, the world's richest man, deciding to go to war against the woke mind virus, to go to war essentially against the transgender movement, to go all in for Donald Trump, to purchase the very platform that censored the Hunter Biden laptop story in the 2020 election, which probably moved a lot of votes. If social media hadn't suppressed stories like that, who knows how the 2020 election would have played out. And so we got somebody who got radicalized and then in response went all in for Trump because he saw Trump essentially as the best tool to destroying the woke mind virus that destroyed his own son. And so there's a lot of different conclusions to be taken away from this election. One of those conclusions is that the transgender movement in a decade went from in 2014, when Laverne Cox, the trans-identifying male who played in the TV show Orange is the New Black, was on the front page of Time magazine with the title The Transgender Tipping Point, to the Trump election. I think we're going to see those 10 years as the rise and fall of the American transgender movement. And that after today, we're going to see a steady decline. And if we saw no soul searching whatsoever on behalf of the Democrats, I would say there's still obviously a brutal fight ahead of us. The LGBT movement owns many of the institutions. They've deeply infiltrated and are deeply embedded in many other institutions. But when you see even people like AOC saying it's time to remove the pronouns, when you've got Bill Clinton phoning the White House and saying you've got to deny that we support this because this is nuts. When you've got Democrats recognizing that essentially what happened is that they transitioned with the transgender movement, and now they want to detransition. And they want to detransition quickly, but it turns out detransitioning is pretty hard, and they may not be able to do so without irreversible damage. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time to listen to this week's episode of the Bridgehead Briefing. If you have any comments or insults or firm disagreements, you can drop those in the comments. If there's a subject you want us to cover, please let us know that in the comments as well. If you found the content helpful, you can share it around or like the video or subscribe. You can also find our content wherever else you get your content. If you want to see what other sort of stuff is going on, go to thebridgehead.ca where we post our written commentary as well. Thanks so much. Hope to see you again next week.